it's really about having a life outside of medicine, right? And keeping that balance. And I think that that balance has become more important over the last couple of years.
All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. We have an awesome guest with us today who is going to be especially helpful for all of our pre-med listeners. Today, I am speaking with Jennifer Welch. Jennifer began her career as an admissions counselor at a small private college and most recently served as an associate dean of admissions and financial aid at a large academic medical center in New York for the past 10 years. She's worked with thousands of prospective students, guiding them throughout undergraduate and professional school application processes. So you guys are going to get a lot of insight today. And thank you so much to Jennifer for coming on.
Thank you, Adam, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So can you, I guess, just for those that don't know or haven't crossed paths, maybe students that haven't applied to the medical school that you were formerly at, could you give a little bit of your background and how you got into the position that you did until recently when you started holistic admissions advising?
Absolutely. So I had, after my 2 years at the small private liberal arts college, I came to the academic medical center as an admissions counselor, was kind of looking for a change and a different kind of atmosphere in terms of education, and began working at the academic medical center in 1994, which is probably when a lot of our listeners, or your listeners, I guess, weren't even born yet. So I had the opportunity to start there, and I worked with PA students and PT students and nursing students and a lot of that. And I really loved it. And then I moved into medical school in 2001 as the director of admissions, and then the associate dean in 2013. And I love the professionalism of the students. I love the drive of the students. I love working with them from beginning to end. The medical school admissions process is one that is incredibly long and overwhelming. And I have found that I really love developing relationships with students in order to help them meet their goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's one of the most rewarding career paths, and serving as a mentor and helping students. I mean, you were also on the other end of it, evaluating students. So you were actually, I know the bio, I said 10 years, but you were really in admissions for much longer than that, just not at first as the associate dean. So what have you seen over, I mean, it seems like 20 plus years in medical school admissions. What are some of the things that you've seen that have changed? I mean, even the MCAT was different back then. So what are some things, different challenges or things that people are looking for now that may have been different from when you first started?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And yeah, it's been 30 years actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I think
you've seen it all then.
I have. And I think that one of the things is that medicine is more focused now on the holistic piece and the humanities. Prior to the change in the MCAT, it was really, science focused, very science focused. And while science is really important and you have to understand science in order to be a good doctor, you also have to have those human qualities, and so there's more of an interest in people that can really interact with others, that have a good understanding of people and their backgrounds and where they're coming from. Our communities have changed so drastically over the last many years that I think that we're going in the right direction. But it has definitely become more competitive. It's funny, when I was serving on the admissions committee, a lot of the doctors would say, if I was going through medical school right now, I don't know if I would get in. And it's become so much more competitive, and really, I think it's about putting that holistic perspective on an application, so that when you get to the admissions committee and you're presenting students are presenting themselves in their application, but that it speaks to multiple people. Like at my place, there were 35 people on the admissions committee. So you wanted an application that spoke to, maybe research, or maybe basic science, or clinical work, or service, or extracurricular activities, something that makes the student very well-rounded. So I think that it has changed significantly in terms of what the medical schools are looking for. And I think that they're also much more mission based than ever before. So I think that it has changed significantly. The prerequisites have changed significantly. The numbers have certainly changed significantly. And I do think that medical schools are really looking to look at the holistic perspective of an application and really understand the story of the student. And I'm not sure that that was happening, 15 or 20 years ago.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I completely agree with the humanism part. Like I've told this story to some of the mentees that when they're starting intern year and they're nervous, because I remember being nervous starting as an intern year physician, and I was like, if even if because there's this gap, so you study for your step exams, your board exams, and you feel like the smartest person ever. Then there's this like year gap before you start intern year, and you feel like you forgot like 80% of the material by then. And so I was saying to myself, like, even though myself, everyone else is nervous the first day of intern year, I was like, even if I don't remember all the information, as long as I'm nice to my patients and empathetic, I feel like that will get me through. And that has served me very well all through residency. Like, you don't need to know everything. Even sometimes if you know less than the other doctor, but you're able to connect and communicate with the patients and you listen to them, to be honest, I'm not saying you shouldn't know everything. You should try to know as much as you can, but the patients are going to resonate more with the physician that's listening to them and makes them feel like they're cared for, rather than if you've memorized every single fact in a textbook. Of course, it's important to know the knowledge, but I do agree, and that's usually something when I am nervous or I feel like I'm not as up to date in an area as I'd like to be as I'm going through my training. I could always try and just rely back on the people skills. So that makes a lot of sense with what you're saying about why admissions committees are looking for not just someone who's book smart, but that has these other aspects
Yeah.
to their personality.
That you're a good human, right? And you have the ability to interact with others and you have the ability to make that connection. I think that that is really important. And I ultimately think that that's why the MCAT changed from, being the 3 sections to the 4 sections and adding on the psychology and the human behavior kinds of things. So I think it was an important
Yeah.
thing to do. And I think that that changed in maybe 2015.
Yeah, I was like the first person to
Oh,
take the new test, actually. So
it was
I
overwhelming. I
know
know.
I was like the year, like like a student mentor that I had that she helped me a lot took the older one, and then by the time I was taking it, it was like the first version of the 2015 one. I like it because I like the psych social topics. I will say, like, I feel like you can't really assess someone like humanism and like their personality through that, but it is like a nice addition that's like, all right, we're not going to focus just on organic chemistry and general chemistry on the test, and these are definitely areas that and cars, which gives a lot of students trouble, which we could talk
Yes.
about later.
Yes, it does.
Those sections are definitely not hard sciences, so it does, I'm not saying even the playing field, but it makes the test a little bit more diverse for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then also on that point, you were mentioning, there's going to be like in your medical school, there were 35 different people on the admissions committee. So you want different areas of your application that may speak to different people. Now, it seems like I know a lot of students that I advise, they get very stressed out because, they need the research, they need shadowing and clinical, and there's so many different areas. And while they do need that base of getting these different things for sure, like they should have shadowing and clinical experience. What I tell students is, and let me know what your thoughts on this is, you don't need to like have the extreme in every single area, because you can't be the research person that they're going to be like, oh, this is the person that might be applying for NIH grants, and you can't also then be the community service person that the admissions committees are looking for. It is okay if like you gravitate towards one area, because admissions committees are in general trying to bring together a well-rounded class, and so not to stress about trying to be everything. Now, of course, you need all the experiences, but I find that students, they're trying to do so much and everything that it ends up then hurting their grades and also just their mental health in general. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. And I think that you're absolutely right. It's really about having a life outside of medicine, right? And keeping that balance. And I think that that balance has become more important over the last couple of years. But yeah, if you are interested in research, do research. If the medical schools that you are applying to require research, then do some research. But it doesn't need to be in 5 different labs. It doesn't need to be 5,000 hours. It doesn't need to be anything like that. And it doesn't have to be bench research. It could be psych research. It could be any kind of research that you're really passionate about. And then in terms of the other activities is finding things that you are really passionate about, that you love to do. It's not about the quality of or the quantity of the experiences. It's really about the quality of the experiences. And I don't want somebody's application, and you can kind of see it. I mean, on the other end, you can see where somebody maybe went through and just kind of checked the boxes. But
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for things that, they developed a leadership interest in, or, when they're writing about it, you can really hear that passion and you can hear that excitement. So those are all really important things. And I think, when you think about it, and you think about all of the different people on the admissions committee, what are they looking for, right? So you've got the basic science people that are the ones that are going to teach you during your medical school education. So they're really looking at maybe your grades and how well you performed academically. And then you've got the clinical folks who really want to know that you've investigated their field, that you know what you're getting yourself into, you understand what the field of medicine is about. And so, that can take many forms. It can be shadowing, it can be scribing, it can be MA, it can be a little bit of everything. Then you've got, the students who are really interested in you coming in and maybe making a difference in their academic community as well as their local community. And then you had people like me who were administrators who were really looking for somebody who's dedicated to service. So all of those things are important, but I think that you're absolutely right. You don't need to go overboard with any of those things. Find the thing that you really want to do, like to do, or passionate about, but you've got to keep that balance in your life. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, and I think many of our students will also appreciate it. And I agree, and I would say to students too, because they'd ask, well, what other extracurricular should I get involved with? And my favorite answer is to say, just get involved with whatever extracurricular you actually want to get involved with. So for me, like that was club soccer, which actually took up a lot of my time in college, but I ended up talking about that in some of my interviews because one of my interviewers' son played college club soccer, and so I was like, oh, I might have actually played it. And like we talked about that for like half our interview. So you never know when you're interviewing what might come up, but what I feel like I'm sure admissions committees can get a good sense of is when you're faking it. If you're putting these activities that you've never really done, or it just like you join the club, but you go to one meeting every once in a while, but now it's just a spot holder on your application. Well, when you get asked about that in an interview and you really can't talk passionately about it because you aren't actually passionate about it, that might actually be a negative rather than a positive for you.
Oh,
What are your thoughts
oh,
on
it's,
that?
yeah,
Do you see that? I
I have
imagine.
seen that. Yeah, and it's definitely a negative. I've sat with students before who've said, I've done this kind of research, and I've said, so tell me about your research. And then it's just,
Yeah.
and you can tell by their facial expressions that it was just kind of one of those things that they did because they felt that they had to, as opposed to, so tell me about that club soccer. And you light up and you're like, oh my God, I loved it. It really taught me teamwork and leadership skills and all of these other things. And then you find that connection. And, even with students now, I tell students on, when they're preparing their resumes, put your hobbies and your interests at the bottom of it, because you never know who's looking at your application. And maybe they also love rock climbing or whatever. And you find some kind of connection in there that then leads itself to the questions in the interview becoming a little bit more fun than a little bit more, policy driven or something like that. So, yeah, just
Yeah.
be true, and also remember that whatever you put on your application is fair game.
Yeah.
You
No,
can
makes a
be,
lot of sense.
yeah.
So, switching gears a little bit, I'm going to ask a few questions that I know a lot of students want to know from someone that was like a dean of admissions at a medical school. Answer whatever you can. I know that a lot, and I tell students this all the time too. Every medical school, when they're reviewing your apps, they're going to have different policies, right? Some schools might have hard cutoffs, some might not. Some schools may group students and evaluate them and then do another group. Others may be reviewing every single application and then sending out interviews. What I guess you don't have to say for your school, but what are some of the differences that you see? And like, are there, for example, like, did you guys have hard cutoffs for MCAT or GPA scores? And how are, because there's just so many apps now, how are medical schools starting to combat this with just the overwhelming amount of applications that they're getting?
Yeah. So when I took over as the director of admissions, we had cutoffs, and I was really uncomfortable with that because it also didn't bring in the level of competitiveness of the institution that the student went to in terms of GPA. It didn't tell any of the story in terms of, their test taking abilities or anything like that. So we started doing a holistic review even before holistic review was a thing. And I mean, I'm not sure I agree with the schools that have hard cutoffs. I think that that's really, really tough. Um, and I feel like you lose a lot by having those types of things. And I do wish that there was a little bit more transparency in
Right.
that.
Like if it's a cutoff and I'm going to spend $300 for the extra secondary to apply, but you are automatically going to reject my application, like that would be good to know. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, you don't know that. But I think it's really important to, look at those missions and follow the missions, because I do think that places are trying to be a little bit more transparent in what they're looking for. But we would look at grades and MCATs, and I think that quite honestly, that's probably 60 to 65% of a decision. You have to be able to make it academically in medical school.
Mm,
So there is a certain level of uh, MCAT scoring that's important, and GPA. I mean, if you have a 2.5 GPA, you're probably going to struggle a little bit in medical school. Yeah,
yeah. No, I mean, exactly.
but
Sorry, did I cut you off?
no, no, no. But then all of the other things are important. But yeah, I just wish that there was more transparency in terms of what schools were really looking for in their application, because I have heard stories, and I just heard about this phenomenon that I had no idea even existed, was a silent rejection. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Mm. Yeah, when I mean, it happens in like residency apps too, where students just they got rejected, but they don't even know, so they never even get the email, and they're waiting till the whole year. Oh, maybe that interview is going to come, but they were rejected 4 months ago, and just wasn't even sent out a letter that they were rejected.
Yeah, that's surprising to me. And I just think, the students prepare, that this process is what, 2 years long, year and a half, pushing it a little bit. But, you put as much as you can into that application, and you spend money and time and effort, and that's just the application process. That doesn't count any of the stuff that's previous to that. And then to not hear anything from a school, I think is really unfortunate. Um, and that was something that it was really important to me, was getting decisions out as quickly as possible, responding to students, especially students that emailed me directly.
Hmm.
I really tried very, very hard to respond to all of those, and let students know that they were cared about, and that I was interested. But it is hard. We would get 5,500 applications for 150 spots, and how do you filter that? um,
Yeah.
we would read through every one of those applications, and really see if there was any real wonderful nugget of information that we could pull out, because it was more about how can we, instead of we don't want to, so
Right. That makes sense. You were trying to look for the good. Obviously, you could still only take 150 spots, you said,
yeah, yeah.
but that's a good lens in which to view the applications, which, not every school is going to view it that way. What are some of the other differences because I'm sure not everything about all the other schools, but that you would see between at different admissions committees and how they approach students, because that's what I would try to explain to students. Like every school is going to have it different, and you're not going to know their exact process. Like you mentioned, the transparency is not there. So for one school, they may not like something that you did, but another school might love it. So you just never know, and you should never reject yourself by not applying to a school that you really want to apply to.
Absolutely. And I think that too, and I say this to students too, is I'd rather you pay the $45 to apply to the school and keep kind of your options open. And then maybe when you get their secondary, or, you can look on all different sites and you can see the secondary questions. If those secondary questions really align with your interests and your mission and your where you see yourself, then complete that application, right? I think I'd rather you just be ready and early in the application process, and then kind of decide a little bit later whether or not it's a fit for you. But yeah, I agree. I think that schools, and I've seen this. There are some schools that don't release any decisions until February or March. And so you might not hear anything from them until that period of time. And maybe you submitted your application in May, completed it in July, and then you don't hear anything until March. I think that that's a really, really long time to wait.
Yeah.
And you're wondering, especially at that time, do I need to reapply? What's my alternate path? What am I going to do maybe if I have this gap year? And so there's so many things that go into that. And I think that really just if we could get them to be a little bit more transparent, and I think the AAMC really tries to do that, but certainly every school is different in what they're looking for, and it can definitely change with new deans coming in, new admissions deans
Right.
coming in, new presidents coming in, and so missions can change, interests can change, and sometimes a school could be focused on, I don't know, let's just say humanities majors one year, and then a new dean or somebody comes in and says, no, let's really focus on engineering majors, or somebody that,
Right.
did experiences abroad. So you never do know. But I also think that doing your homework and trying to figure out as much as you can and go to info sessions and things like that to learn. College fairs, I know Columbia is having theirs in a couple weeks, and that's always a really great event for students to go to. So going and learning as much as you can about the institution, I think is imperative.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you actually were mentioning like the secondaries coming out and whether or not to apply after you get the secondary, not selling yourself short, not even putting it on your AMCAS app. There's a common thought amongst this, like the whole pre-med world and applications, about getting your secondaries in about 2 weeks after you receive them. Is that something you guys look for in terms of an applicant showing interest, that they're getting that secondary in within a reasonable time frame?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've had students where I've sent a secondary in July and they've returned it on November 30th.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
And like at that point, most interviews are already out and done.
absolutely. And so, at that point of the year, you might have, interview slots that are, only when somebody cancels, right?
Right.
So it is important to get that back. And I know that there are some schools that have a 2-week turnaround deadline. And I definitely think a 2-week turnaround is really important for students to focus on and keep track of, and have a spreadsheet that really tracks when they got it and when they submit it.
Or or a pre-med tracker. You can go to
Or a pre-med tracker.
premedtracker.io,
Yep.
which we've created for students for free to track their applications and which statuses each application is at. So maybe I'll put a promo of that at the end of this.
Absolutely. Good
Uh,
idea.
but yeah, I agree. Keeping all of that information. The application is there's so many schools, it gets very complicated, so keeping track of everything and getting things, especially the secondaries, back in about 2 weeks. Now I say to some students, look, I don't want you to sacrifice quality, right? If you're like, sometimes you'll get 8 applications all at once and you have to prioritize, unfortunately. But at that point, I don't want you to submit a bad essay, so I'd rather you take an extra week too, if you have to get something good in. If you saw things like apps came back a little bit after 2 weeks, if it was 3-4 weeks, would you be looking at that negatively? Or it's more like, okay, we sent you the secondary a while ago, now clearly we are not your top priority for
Yes.
medical school, and that's going to affect our decision. But if it's a couple weeks, two is a good benchmark.
Yep.
And most schools are gonna, if it's a little bit after, be okay with that. But that's a good, I think, benchmark to give, because students need a deadline, or they'll push things off forever.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree. Yeah. If it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I don't think it really matters unless it's a specific deadline by the school. So, keep that in your pre-med tracker. But I do think that as long as it's not 3 or 4 months, because it gives them the idea that they're not you're not as a medical school high on their list, and just really maybe not interested. So that's another thing to kind of think about. And one of the things I just wanted to go back to that I wanted to bring up was about updates and updates to medical schools. And I always accepted them until the application went to, or a decision was made, because we didn't have a situation where, if you sent an update, we would go back and re-review any alternate lists or anything like that. But I do think it's unfortunate that some schools don't take updates, because a lot can change between May, when a student
Oh, for
submits a
sure.
primary, right? And September, when you might be looking at their application, a lot can change. And so, I think it's unfortunate. And again, it's another one of those things that I wish that there was a little bit more consistency, because students have to do some digging to find out if there are
They
schools that
They
take.
really do. And as you say that, that gives me a good idea. Maybe that's something, those policies we could add to our pre-med tracker as well. Because I agree, for most students, when they ask us, should I send an update, we have to, it's first, I usually say, what did they, because a lot of times on the interview day, if this is an update after an interview, sometimes students send updates before, but on interview day, they usually tell you their policy. Sometimes they'll say, do not email us. And if that's the case, like, then don't, because that's going to look bad.
Right.
Others are okay with it, but they'll say, and only email the admissions email at this place. Um, and so you either get it from there, or you have to really look on the website to find out. There's not really one central place, and every school does do updates differently.
Yep.
How would you guys, from a school that did take updates, how would you factor that in? Like, would you, really take the time and look at that update? And if it's a notable addition, like, really, do you think that affected decisions at times?
I do, especially when it came to the point where you are, once you get to the point where you've only got maybe 50 or so interview slots left. And quite frankly, there comes a time when a lot of applications look the same. They
Right.
have similar grades, similar MCATs. They went to similar types of institutions. They have similar kind of CVs. And you're looking for those pieces that, I've only got 50 interview slots left or 10 interview slots left. And if a student submits an update and is a significant update, and what I mean by that is, I had an opportunity to do more clinical, or I had a paper published, or I was really involved in this service experience and I was able to do X, Y, and Z. That can play a really big role in their application. So 100%, if a school accepts an update and you have something that's substantial, then I would send it. I wouldn't send it too
Agreed.
often, though. Don't,
Yes, yes.
not
Try for
weekly.
one update, unless two really unique things happen. I agree. I usually say one update. You could also do, it depends if when your update is, right? So if your update was before the interview, maybe you didn't get the interview yet and you're pushing for the interview, you can send the one update, and then later on, if it is your top choice, letter of interest. Can you talk a little bit about how you viewed those, students saying that, this was my top choice. I really loved everything about my interview day and connecting with the professors. What are some of the things that you like to see, and what are the things that kind of sound just tacky? And it's like, oh, the student's just trying to get the admission, but I don't even really know if this is actually their first choice.
Yeah, and that's you can kind of tell when you're reading those, if they're genuine or not. And I would say that they need to be very specific. You can tell when somebody's just kind of cutting and pasting the name of an institution. You dedicated to diversity, the
Right, right.
underserved community. So you are really looking for those potential connections with your institution. So, I would advise students that are writing things like that to make them very, very specific to the institution. If they had a really great time at the interview day, what was it about the interview day that really, resonated with them? Was there a particular student speaker or a club or something that they learned about that they didn't know previously that they want to know a little bit more about? What was that? But we do look at those, and we look at those before the admissions committee reviewed the application. I'm talking like I'm still there. But we do that, and we definitely take that into consideration when we're evaluating the application.
Now, does it matter to you if a student is saying, like, this is my first choice, so it's very clear, and I tell students you should never ever send that to more than one school. Because then I mean, that's just a very bad look if you get acceptances to two schools that you said first choice to, and then you're having, I mean, that's now we're getting into academic dishonesty. So you'll have students, right, that'll say this is one of my top choices, or I'm very interested in this school, I really love. But then you also have students that are very clear, like, this is my top choice, this is where I want to go. If accepted, I will absolutely take it. Do you find, does that factor in?
I think that it can if all of the other things line up, like if it makes sense, right? Um, if their mission kind of in your mission align, and it's very clear, you know, they've reached out a couple of times, they've attended information sessions, they've, you know, been at different things. And, you know, that's one of the things that I would say to anybody listening. If you go to info sessions or you go to virtual fairs or anything like that, you need to have your camera on. You know, I can't tell you what a turnoff that is to be talking to a group of students and have cameras off or not have names. You need to remember that, you know, we're kind of in this virtual world. So your name and your photo and
Yeah.
all of those things and you know, your face are going to go a long way. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that we're looking for is that connection too, and that you've made an effort
Right.
to let us know that we are your top choice. And I 100% agree with you. Do not say that multiple schools are your top choice, because that can come back to bite you.
Yeah, no, that's actually extremely valuable insight, and something I haven't thought about. Really, like, cameras on in these info sessions, because like, let's say the dean of admissions is there and they see your face, and then they remember you on interview day, and now, like, we're all humans, we all have our own biases, but like, so even though you're reviewing apps and whatnot, like, if you see a student's face multiple times in info sessions, you know, like, okay, that student was serious about coming here. When they write this at letter of intent, I actually believe them because I've seen them, I've spoken to them, they were asking lots of questions at this school. And honestly, it's hard to do that for like 12, 15 different schools to show that level of interest. So you know that that level of interest is more genuine. And I think we're also biased to, like, if you see someone more and you could tell like that student was always around, always like, and doing it properly, not like too much in your face and
Right.
overbearing, which I know some students are, and they'll send 16 updates, and
Yeah.
that's not good either.
Right.
But if you really show genuine interest, um, it makes a difference, it sounds like. And in the virtual world, being on camera, that's great insight. Because I bet you some students don't even think about that. Oh, I was at the info session. They're going to see my name was like logged into the Zoom call.
Right.
That's not enough.
Well, and I'm just going to take that another step further, because, you know, if you have a photo, make sure it's professional. Like if you have to step away, I can't tell you the types of photos that I have seen,
Oh man.
that I'm just like, holy cow. You know, and even at the AAMC virtual fair, you know, engage with the people, you know, engage with them, let them see who you are. Ask, you know, your question doesn't have to, you know, change the world. It just needs to be a question so that you can kind of engage with that person who's speaking. But, you know, be prepared for those kinds of things. And yeah, those are just little tiny things that can really make a huge difference.
Makes sense. Awesome. Switching gears a little bit now to the other side, because you do now more mentoring and coaching with students instead of reviewing the apps, you're helping them with their apps. What are some of the things in terms of like how many schools to apply to, which schools to apply to, that you've been telling the students that you're working with?
Yeah, so I think nationally the average is what, 18. I have when I was working, I had a student that applied to 62 medical schools. And I
Wow.
was like, oh my God, don't do that. That's just crazy. But I think that, you know, really no more than 25 is feasible. I think that that's a lot of work. It's very expensive. I do think that students underestimate how much time they're going to need to put into those
Mhm.
secondaries. So, you know, I think that if you do your homework and you really find the schools that you resonate with and feel like would be a good fit, I think no more than 25 for sure.
Got it. No, it's interesting. I do tend to, for students that I feel like may have a little bit lower stats, I do tend to say you should be above the national average. Like if there's, 15 to 18 is around usually that national average, you want to increase your chances. Those other apps will increase your chances, but at some point there is like a law of diminishing returns.
Right.
Also, applying osteopathic medical schools for is a great option, and you
I
can end up
agree.
in the same spot, and those schools are great.
Agreed.
So I think that you don't have to go overboard, but you also, if you have, let's say, not the best stats, you shouldn't be applying to 5 schools. I've seen that too. And I'm like, and they don't get in. I'm like, I mean, I got rejected by way more than 5 schools and I had a pretty decent application. So it's just, you never know if you are only leaving it to that small chance. I mean, I have seen it like the student, I've seen a student, she was like, oh, I only applied to one school and I got it, which like, that's amazing, but you cannot go based off those stories. Like
No,
you should be applying to at least the national average, but I agree. Also, don't go excessive with how many apps because that's a lot of time and money. And if you're not spending the right amount of time actually working on those secondary essays and making them good, then it's kind of like wasted money.
I agree. Yeah. And
What's your thought on?
I,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I love the idea of DO. I think that it's really important. And, now it's very hard to distinguish in terms of residency and things like that. So I think that DO for those students that, are thinking about a different, perspective on medicine, it's really important. So just wanted to
Yeah, no,
echo
just
that.
a point on DO since so I'm a physical medicine rehabilitation resident, and so we really deal with the musculoskeletal system, and a lot of my DO colleagues they have the OMM treatments that they're able to use in our free pain clinic that the residents run every Friday. So they'll go in and they'll do these maneuvers, and the patients really love them. So there you get that benefit of that. Basically, the difference in terms of the medical school curriculum is that one class and I've seen it be very helpful for some patients, and it's a good skill to learn. Now I'm learning it from my DO colleagues,
I bet.
and sometimes when I'm stressed and my neck's hurting, they can help me too. So
Nothing wrong with that.
we help each other out in residency. We
Yeah,
have to.
you need to. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time and all the insight you've given. Any last minute I guess tips or things that you think prospective applicants should be thinking about or working on as they go through their pre-med journey?
So this is going to sound cliche and I don't want it to, but you've really got to be yourself. You've got to be genuine in who you are. And your story is your story. It's not someone else's. And I think just being honest and transparent in your application and who you are and your connection with the medical schools is really important. And quite frankly, for me, one of the most important parts has always been the personal statement. It is where a student really becomes who they are, what they're all about, why they're doing this. And it really allows me to see a different side of them. So that is probably the biggest thing that I would, if you're looking for 2025, be putting a lot of time and effort into that. It's not uncommon to write, 12 drafts of a personal statement. I would also say don't think about sitting down to write your personal statement because you will be blocked. You will have a mental block. You will not know where to start. Just sit down and just start either journaling or starting to think about things, and you'll ultimately start to see your story come together. So spend some time thinking about it, go for a run or a walk and just kind of be with yourself and then kind of come back and just start jotting things down. But when you sit down to write your personal statement, it can be a little overwhelming. You probably know that, Adam.
Absolutely. And I've read thousands of personal statements at this point. So I also know that it's hard to actually write a good personal statement and show your personality and who you are in an essay.
Yeah.
Or really, it's not an essay, it's a personal statement. And so what I would say for that is really like what one exercise I have students do after they're done is to give it to someone, maybe some that know you well, some that don't. Ask them if besides the medical stuff, are they able to know about your personality
Yes.
through that personal statement? Because most of the time I feel like I can't tell that I know anything about the student. I just know what they've done in their academic journey, except I already knew that from reading application
Right.
before that in their activities or their resume. And so I think that is a time where you could actually show your personality and different things that an interviewer might be like, oh, this person has a unique perspective. I'd love to talk to them more about that. Let's give them an
Right.
interview so we can do that.
Yep.
What are some of, I guess, and I was going to wrap up, but this is such an important topic. Maybe we'll go a little bit longer. What are some things that you see like makes a good personal statement, and maybe some red flags that it's like,
Yeah.
no go?
Yeah. So I do think that students need to dig deeper. I 100% agree with you that sometimes it's kind of surface level, and they're just trying to kind of recreate their resume a little bit. And we don't want that. We want really some stories that demonstrate that you have quite frankly met the pre-med competencies that the AAMC has lined out, right? And that you are going to be a good doctor. So, we're looking for stories that resonate with you, that you can kind of put us in that area or space for a minute and kind of describe what was going on, and really what you learned from that, how that kind of further um, served your mission in getting into medicine, right? But it needs to be personal, and I would say not too personal, but it does need to be personal so that you can walk away and you can say, oh, I absolutely get where the student is coming from. I really like this student. I want to learn more about this student. Red flags, students tend to do sometimes a lot of, like, they open their stories with quotes from, I don't know, Mark Twain, whoever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they take it as a creative writing piece
Yeah,
versus a
it is
personal
not
statement.
that, right? So those are some things. And sometimes students will, and I've read a lot of sick grandparents. And I
Hmm.
get that. I can appreciate that. But I want to know about you and your
Exactly.
reaction to the illness of your grandparent, or the caring for your grandparent, or the death of your grandparent. I want to know more about you and what that kind of demonstrated to you, and what you kind of did with that experience. So
Yeah, I think that's key. I'm gonna the did with that experience too. Like, talk about the experience, but I think sometimes, and this is gonna sound a little harsh, some of the personal statements I read is just a straight like "woe is me" essay.
yeah,
My life is terrible, so accept me to medical school.
yeah.
But
So
you
that
need
can make
to
a difference.
show like this is okay. If everyone's gonna have traumatic things that have happened to them or tough things that they've had to deal with, and that's definitely a part of your story. But then you also have to show what you plan to do with that and more about you as a person and how you're going to contribute to the medical school class and eventually as a doctor, and specifically a doctor. Because what I also tell students is, if you submit this application to PA school or nursing schools, would it work? And if so, then I don't know why you specifically want to be a physician rather than other amazing parts of the healthcare team, but not specifically physician, because you are applying to medical school.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with that more. But yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So there you go. For the listeners, there's a little bit of a crash course on some of the things to think about and to not think about when writing the personal statement. We'll wrap it up there. I really, really appreciate your time. I think this is going to be a super helpful episode for any pre-med that is applying soon, or even if you're just starting out as pre-med, some of the things you could start to think about as you're navigating the pre-med journey. So thank you, Jennifer, so much for coming on. And for anyone that wants to hear more or see more from Jennifer, where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram under Holistic Admissions Advising. And then certainly my website, holisticadmissionsadvising.com. And Adam,
Awesome.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.